something that you and I can create, a feeling, an emotion, a belief inside of our bodies, interacts with the stuff that we can't see in the world and that modern science until recently hasn't even acknowledged, and affects change in our physical world. We are born with the ability, the language, to speak through our hearts and influence, not control, not manipulate, not impose our will, but we influence the healing of our bodies, the peace between nations, the abundance, our spiritual abundance, our material abundance, the quality of our relationships, our romance, our friendships, the success of our careers, all of those things. That's why this work is so relevant. We are spiritual beings walking this earth. It's a mystery, truly, as to where we've come from. A lot of theories out there. The bottom line is nobody knows for sure. It's a mystery as to where we go when we leave this place. A lot of theories. A lot of my best friends are speaking here about what that means. James von Prague even speaks to dead people on the other side. But we really don't know. What we do know is while we're here, we've got some time together. We've got some time together to explore this world. And in our exploration, we have created conditions and situations now that we have to deal with. And what our own science is telling us, and what the wisdom of our past has always said, is that we're part of everything that we've created. And that means that we are part of any solutions that come to pass. That's what this flowchart is telling us. Something we do in our lives affects our physical world. If we do not understand how it happens, when it does occur, we call it a miracle. If we have a feeling and all of a sudden the breast cancer is healed, the doctor says, oh, well, that's a miracle. And they just write it off to a miracle. They say, we can't explain it because these relationships are not understood. And we mentioned yesterday, if we do understand these relationships, they're no longer miracles, it's a technology. And it's a technology that ancient cultures have used. It's a technology that indigenous peoples are still using today beyond the borders of this beautiful country of ours. And so my path has been as a scientist during the Cold War years of the 1980s, working in a nuclear missile program, designing software for the MX missile in Denver, Colorado. In my weekends and spare time, I was researching the text, finding out, hopefully, the information that would help us to create the world where we'll never have a war like that again. And what I'm doing to you is, to the best of my ability, bringing the essence of what I have found to share with you, to add to your toolbox of everything you already know. And every one of you all could get up here and do a program just as easily about the things in your life. You might not have the same pictures, but you would have the experiences that you could share. The reason that our modern world has been so slow in picking up what that flowchart is saying to us is because, as good as our science is, we know that it is based in two false assumptions that were proven false only at the end of the 20th century and now the first years of the 21st century. Two false assumptions. The assumption that everything is separate from everything else, number one. Number two, the assumption that what happens inside of our bodies has no effect in the world beyond our bodies. We now know is the fact that we live in a world that is made of a shared matrix of energy. There's something that underlies this physical reality. We cannot see it, but it fills all space. There is no empty space. That something goes by many names. It's been referenced by many traditions in many different ways. We know it's there, number one. Number two, we now know that you and I are born speaking the language that influences that stuff. We call it emotion, feeling, belief, intent. That stuff has so many different names. We identified a few of these yesterday. Some physicists are now calling this field of energy the quantum hologram. Stephen Hawking is calling it the mind of God. The father of quantum theory called it the matrix, now being called the divine matrix. All names for the same field. So if you were not with us yesterday, this is the essence of what we did to help us understand that field is there. And we arrived at this point. We said if we're going to use that field, if we're going to use the divine matrix, we've got to understand a little bit about how it works and speak the language it recognizes. But this is the language I like to use here, so I'm more comfortable with what we're doing right here. So the deep reality is that a growing number of mainstream scientists, these aren't like old retired guys sitting on a park bench feeding the pigeons on, somewhere in the middle of nowhere thinking of a new project. These are mainstream scientists are beginning to suspect that our universe and our bodies and our lives actually work like a really, really big computer. As a matter of fact, not only are they suspecting it, MIT professor Seth Lloyd, who is the designer of the world's first feasible quantum computer, he doesn't say it works like a computer. This is a quote. He said, the universe is a computer. It's a quantum computer. And in longer programs, we can explore precisely what that means and the parallels between the way a universe works and your body works and your laptop works are probably no coincidence. And the parallels are striking. They are astounding. But the bottom line for all this, you all know enough about computers to know that an electronic computer uses numbers to get things done, right? When you type an email, ABCDEFG, hello Greg with 2 Gs, you know that those letters are being converted into ones and zeros that go across the line somehow and get translated to someone else. That's electronic computer is programmed by numbers. Our consciousness computer is programmed as well, but it's programmed by belief. It's not the ones and zeros of numbers. It's the energetic patterns of what you and I create within our hearts. Does that make sense? Are you okay with that? The parallels between the electronic and the consciousness computers, both of them need programs to get things done. The programs, when you look at the way belief works, or you look at the way programs work, they are so similar. Belief literally is a code based on a language that you and I were born speaking in our hearts. Now, I think intuitively we all suspect that. We sense it. And we've heard it for a long time, the language of the heart. But it's always been used more in a poetic sense. Now it's becoming very concrete, very, very tangible, and very factual. So I've asked the question before, how much power do we really have to change our world, to change our lives, to change our bodies? How much power do you think we have? I know because you're in a workshop here, you're all going to say we have a lot of power. But how much power do you really believe? Let me ask this. How many of you believe that you were born into this world with a power that you have never fully utilized? Do you believe that? Do you sense? Okay, that's almost everybody in the room. Then let me ask the next question. If you have that power, how come you've never used it? We don't know how, or we are so conditioned, even people that have spent their lives in monasteries halfway around the world where this understanding is supported day in and day out, they say our conditioning is so deep that we are powerless beings subconsciously that even they, when they're trained, have to break through the disbelief to access that inner power, to access what it's all about. This is a quote. I love this quote. It is out of the 1st century Buddhist sutra, the Mahayana Sutras. This is actually from the Heart Sutra, is what it's called, and it's a direct quote from the translation. It says that the reality of our world, whether it's your body or whether it's our physical world or whether it's our situation in life, reality exists only where we create a focus. The question is, how do we create the kind of focus that influences our reality? Where this is where modern science now is only catching up with those ancient traditions, because science has discovered the force of belief. Scientists know that belief has a power, but scientists don't believe it. Science has found the force of belief, and they don't believe it. How many of you have heard something called the placebo effect? Everybody in this room, probably. If you're a medical student, you know that you get about 15 minutes of first-year med school where they talk about this little fluke called placebo, and then they don't talk about it anymore. It may be the basis for the healing of the last 8,000 years of human history. Because modern medicine is said to be only about 100 years old, but we've been healing ourselves for 8,000 years. Without modern medicine, what did we use? Well, this might give us some insights into what it is. The term was actually coined in 1955. H.K. Beecher, chief of anesthesiology at Boston's General Hospital, Boston, Massachusetts General Hospital, published his landmark paper. It was called The Powerful Placebo. Many of you have probably seen it before. The bottom lines of the paper was that he studied a number of people who had undergone medical procedures, and he found that about a third of them healed from essentially nothing. And this led to a group of studies, and I want to share just how far the placebo studies have gone, if you are not aware of some of this. Those of you that are less familiar with a placebo is when someone is given something by a person that they trust, It might be themselves, it might be a doctor, it might be a friend, it might be your parent. And they believe that whatever it is that they have received, either a substance or a procedure, will help them with a condition. They believe it to be true. That's a placebo. This goes so far, and if you have not heard of some of these, I want to share these with you. There's a cardiologist in Seattle, Washington. His name is Leonard Cobb. He took this one step further and used a placebo procedure in a heart procedure that is typically used for people that have a condition called angina. And the idea is that the blood flow needs to be increased in certain parts of the heart. What they typically do is they will go in surgically into the heart. They'll tie off a couple of arteries in one place to force the blood somewhere else. And it's got about a 90% success rate. So when someone hears that they are going to get this procedure and they know it's got a 90% success rate, they say, oh, I'm probably going to be okay in about 3 hours. So here's what he did. I wouldn't want to be the patients. Here's what he did. He took the patients, he anesthetized them, he took them into surgery, he opened them up as if he were going to do a surgical procedure. But what did he do? Absolutely nothing. He closed them right back up. He stitched them back up. What do you think the effect was? The placebo surgery had exactly the same success rate of 90% as if the procedure had already been done, when in reality nothing was done, and the only thing that changed was the people believed that something had been done. This has had such an impact on the medical community, they now have stopped the original procedure altogether. It's called internal mammary ligation. It's abandoned. Talk about this in the new book, The Spontaneous Healing of Belief. But it goes even further than this. How many of you heard of the nocebo effect? It's the opposite of placebo. Placebo is where you believe something can help you. Nocebo is where you have good reason to believe something will harm you. This is a very famous study. It's ongoing today. It's the very famous Framingham Heart Study. Began in 1948. And what they did, 1948, they took 5,209 men, women, between the ages of 30 and 62. They have been evaluated every 2 years for cardiac risk factors. Now they're taking the children of the original people and the grandchildren of the children. So the study goes on across generations. Bottom line is this. The women in the study who believed that they were prone to the heart disease, even though they may not be, were nearly 4 times as likely to die from the conditions they believed that they would have than other women who had exactly the same risk factors but didn't believe that they would be affected. The only thing that was different was how they felt about what was happening. Well, scientists see this. Medical people see this and they say, well, maybe it's psychosomatic. It's all psychosomatic. Well, it is, but what does that mean? What does psychosomatic really mean? Well, look at this. If you've never seen this study, this is a very rare study. It was only published a couple of years ago. Very, very powerful. Showing that our body believes what we believe to be true on the chemical level in the cells of our brain. Our bodies believe what we believe to be true. This was an unprecedented study of belief. It was done in the Turin Medical School in Turin, Italy, May of 2004. Interesting, it's done in Turin, Italy, right? You know what else is there? The shroud, the very famous Shroud of Turin. Patients were given drugs that mimic the dopamine that naturally occurs in the brain to relieve pain. These were people that were having a lot of body pain. Some of them were, they had MS, for example, in some of the patients in the studies. Others had undergone chemotherapy. A lot of pain. So they were given a drug that would mimic the body's natural dopamine as if it were already there. And when that happens, the pain is relieved. Okay, so they knew that. Here's the catch. The drug has a lifespan of only 60 minutes. The drug only lasts in their body 1 hour, and then it's metabolized away. The pain comes back. The drug is no longer there after that hour. The patients didn't know that. So they were given this drug, and what they came to understand was every time they got the drug, they knew that the pain went away and they were going to feel better. Okay, well, this is a placebo study, so you know what they did. The patients were actually given a placebo that was saline. There was nothing else in there, but they were told it was the stuff that they had had before. And because every time before they had experienced the relief of the pain, when they got the placebo, what happened? Okay, well, you know where this is going, but you may not know exactly how far it goes. They believed they were being given the same drug. In reality, they were given a simple saline solution, a placebo. Now, here's what made this study different. In the University Medical School in Turin, Italy, they had equipment to do brain scans. And they scanned the brain of the people after they received the placebo. And in fact, they were given nothing. But after they were given nothing, they scanned their brains, and their brain cells responded as if the dopamine was actually in their bodies. Their cells believed what they believed in their heart. This is a quote. They say it's the first time we've seen the placebo effect at the single neuron level in the human body. And that tells us you can call it psychosomatic, you can call it psychological, you can call it whatever you want. The key is, and the bottom line, this is a bottom line crowd, is that when we truly believe, not when we just think it, not when we suspect, not when we hope, not when we wish, not when we're praying, when we truly embrace the certainty that something is so, our bodies will respond internally. And now the physics is showing us that the effect extends beyond our bodies into the world around us. When we have a feeling in our heart, we affect the world inside of our bodies as well as the world beyond our bodies. Yesterday we began a series of belief codes. They're pulled from the various books that are out there on that book table. This is Belief Code 11 from the Spontaneous Healing of Belief that summarizes what we've just done here. It says, what we believe to be true in life may be more powerful than what others accept as the truth. If a doctor looks at you and says, you don't look so good to me, you may not have much longer in this world, which a doctor just said to a friend of mine recently. I think a doctor should never say that. That's a doctor's opinion, but there are a lot of factors that they are not accounting for. Here's where the danger is. If the person that hears that trusts and respects the doctor, what kind of an effect do you think it has on them? Or if a doctor says, now think about this. What if a doctor says, I've never seen a condition like yours before. That's always what you like to hear, right? But I saw some new studies, and I think there's a new drug that might help. I really don't think it's going to help much, you, in your situation, but let's give it a shot. That doubt that has been introduced in the studies has shown beyond a shadow of a doubt to actually have a detrimental effect on the patient's ability to receive the benefit of what they're giving. And the truth is, it may not have much to do with the drug at all. It may have a lot to do with their belief, their trust that something has been... You all have heard this. How many of you found this to be true? You or your kids, you start to get sick. And you say, I don't want to go to the doctor, don't want to go to the doctor. And you say, well, I need to be at a meeting in 2 weeks. I'm going to make sure I'm good for this meeting, so I'll make an appointment. And you're feeling really bad, and you get to a certain point, you say, okay, this is this bad. I definitely have to go to the doctor. As soon as you make the appointment, you get in the car and go, what happens? You start feeling better because in your mind you know that you're going to somebody that you trust that's going to help you feel better. And I'm not saying that they don't, but I think the way we feel about the choice we made has a lot to do with it. What we now know is that your heart has its own brain. The human heart, literally, this is not a metaphor, it's not figurative, it literally now has been documented with neural tissue, brain and spinal cord-like tissue, neurons in the brain. It has its own memory, and we're talking about what now is called heart intelligence, heart-based intelligence. I don't want you to take my word for it. In just a moment, I'm going to show you why. I want you to see with your own eyes and hear today, so that you can really embrace this. Why? It's so much more powerful to feel your way into healing, to feel your way into peace in your family, to feel your way into peace between nations or into the success of your career or the abundance, your spiritual abundance or your material abundance. Your brain can do it, but your brain has to work so very hard because it was not designed to do what your heart is designed to do. And you're going to see why in just a minute. Before we do that, one more little summary slide. Some of you were not with me yesterday. If you were and you saw this slide and you said, this is for you as well. Because what I want to do is define what I'm talking about when we say and use the word feeling. The ancients make a distinction between thought, feeling, and emotion. And this particular image comes directly from a Sanskrit text. So this is a Sanskrit image showing the energy centers, the 7 energy centers of the body, but they divide them 3 above, 3 below, and there's 1 in the center. Where is that 1 in the center? What is the organ it's associated with? Absolutely. Here it is, right here. The 3 upper centers, the communication centers, are associated with what they call thought or communication. But what we think about has very little power in our world, in our lives, until we breathe, until we imbue some force, some power into that thought. And you and I are built to do that through what we call the emotion of the lower energy centers. When we marry the emotion of these lower centers with our thought, now we have a definition of feeling. When we marry the emotion of these lower centers with the thought in our brain, what we do is we create what is now called feeling, and it happens in the heart. And the ancients said to us, they're very clear, that we're capable of only 2 primary emotions, love and whatever you think the opposite of love is. For most people, it's love and fear. Put your own words in there if that doesn't work for you. The bottom line is this. When we have a thought in our mind, I shared a story yesterday, my engineer friend, John, he had affirmations all over his house, all over his car, all over his cubicle, little Post-it notes, millions of them, well, hundreds of them, that he said millions of times a day, that all said exactly the same thing. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. And I asked him, does it work? He says, I say them a million times a day. I said, does it work? He said, no. And I said, why? And his answer to that is the key to what's happening here. He said, no, it doesn't work. I said, why do you think it is? He goes, look at me. Who would ever want to be with somebody like me? I'm an engineer. And he did. He said he wears the same, and I'll vouch for this, he wore the same clothes to work 3 out of the 5 days out of every week. And his life was all about work. But that's the key. His thought was, my perfect mate is manifesting for me now. In his emotion, he even didn't think that he was a good partner. So when he created his feeling, how could he possibly draw a partner into his life? Because the thought was, my perfect mate is manifesting for me now. But the emotion was the fear that he wasn't worthy of a partner. And this is where the technology comes in. You can have the same thought, pump in a different emotion, create a different feeling, and create different effects. That's technology. If he had the thought, my perfect mate is manifesting for me now, and the love of what his life would be like in the presence of that partner, can you see how that would be a whole different effect, a different feeling? And it would probably create different experiences in his life. Feeling and belief are very closely related, very closely associated. So when I talk about beliefs and the placebo effects, or I talk about feelings and the monasteries that we're going to, we're talking about a heart-based experience. Can you see why that is? Are you okay with that? Make sense? Does it? Okay, good. So, the question, how do you know if you're having a thought or if you're having a feeling? You ever wonder that? This is one of the places that's really difficult. It's a very subjective experience. It's hard to talk about. A lot of speakers simply won't go there because it is hard to talk about. But I wanted, in our 90 minutes today, I wanted to work with this a little bit just to give you a sense of the difference between a thought and a feeling. Are you okay if we do this a little bit? How many of you wonder, do you ever have a question about the difference between a thought and a feeling and an emotion? How do you know? Well, you know the definition. I've given them to you. But what does that mean in terms of an experience? And I think experience is the only way to really maybe differentiate between the two. People's lives, people's experiences, and especially when they are in deep devotional experiences, seem to give us a lot of feeling. Nature, like the ruggedness, the sheer ruggedness of a Tibetan glacier, that's a feeling-based experience. But we begin to see things like people. But when we talk about people, it seems like the closer we get to them, the more we begin having the feeling. And we see the devotion in their eyes. Do you have any kind of feeling when you're looking at him? The ability to do surgical procedures on a fetus before they're born so that when they are born, the condition that may have impaired them is healed by the time they come out of the womb has reached advanced stages now. I think you're all aware of that. In the year, I think it was 2000, this amazing documentation occurred of something that apparently happens frequently. We just don't get to see the pictures. What happened was this. There was a young baby boy. He was in his mother's womb, and he had a spinal condition. So they were doing a routine surgery on this baby boy, doing a spinal operation. Now, here is the catch to the whole thing. The catch is that his mother was anesthetized because he's hooked up to his mother's blood supply. He is believed to be anesthetized as well. So here's the catch. What they do is they open up the mother's tummy, they pull her uterus out of her tummy and lie it on her chest to perform this procedure. Because while the womb sac was sitting outside of the body on the mother's tummy, and both were believed to be anesthetized, the most amazing thing happened. The doctor had opened the womb, he was working on this boy's spine, and all of a sudden this boy reached with his hand out through the slit in the womb into the air, and he grabbed the doctor's finger. Now, there was controversy as to whether or not this actually happened. And I went directly to the source, directly to the site, and when you see what you're going to see, there's little doubt. The doctor is holding the finger. There's no doubt that the finger is grasping consciously the hand. This is what happened. Look at this. Here is the womb sac. Here's the mother's tummy right here. Here's the womb. Here is the hand. If there's any doubt about what you're seeing here, this hand is firmly wrapped around that finger. And when the doctor tried to pull away, the grasp didn't give up. And he shook this little baby's hand, and then he put his hand back into the womb, closed it up, and he was born healthy and happy a few weeks later. And this little boy now has a picture of his hand before he was born that very few people get to see. Isn't that a powerful story? It's a powerful story of life. Okay, so those are stories. They elicit a feeling. Do you have a feeling in your body? That's very different than looking at geometric circles and squares or even beautiful mountains and sunsets. The stories about life itself. This helps us to understand the difference between thought and feeling. Because it's different for every one of you, you now have to identify that difference for yourself. What is it that feels different about these stories than looking at a white circle on a black background? That's the language. That is the language that you were born with that speaks to the stuff our world is made of. Okay? So you okay with that? What is it that makes that feeling so powerful? Why is that feeling, why does it have any effect beyond your body? Yeah, you say, okay, I'm feeling that, and I can see where it might trigger some brain chemistry in my body, but how could it affect this plant next to me? Or how could it affect the healing of a person on the other side of a barrier that I can't even see? This is what I want you to see about that. This image is what scientists now believe the atoms of our world look like. This is what is called a quantum atom. It looks different than the atoms that look like little solar systems. There's no nucleus. There's nothing orbiting around anything else. There is a pulsation of patterns and zones of energy. The bottom line, in longer programs, we could talk more about this, but the bottom line to this is that the energy being created here is electrical energy and magnetic energy. You've all heard that before. We live in a world of electrical magnetic energy. This stage, my body, your chair, your bodies, the atoms of the world, we are made of denser and less dense electrical and magnetic energy. That's no surprise, right? Okay? So, it's the stuff that makes the world what it is today. This is so important, I put that word right up there. This is going to sound really obvious, but I want you to think about this. If you want to change an atom, you've got to change the energy of that atom, right? You've got to change the energy. Okay, the key is that if you change either the electrical field or the magnetic field of the atom, you'll change the atom. If you change the electrical field of the atoms in a human body, you'll change the way that body is working. Or if you change the magnetic field of the atoms in the human body, you'll change the way that body is working. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question, but don't answer because I worked hard to give you 3 clues, and I want you to see all 3 clues before you answer. So, question, don't answer. What organ in your body creates the strongest electrical field and the strongest magnetic field? Okay, but don't answer because I have a clue. Here's the first clue. What organ creates the strongest But don't answer. What organ creates the strongest electrical pattern and the strongest magnetic patterns? Don't answer. And if you're just waking up and you're saying, what is he doing? What organ in your body is designed, the one organ that's designed to create the strongest magnetic field and electrical field in the human body? Last clue. It's your heart. That's what it does. The pumping of the blood may be the least of what your heart does. May be the least. Look at this. These are brand new studies. These are less than, I think they're only about 2 years old. Look at what the studies are telling us. That the heart's electrical field measured by the EKG is up to 100 times stronger than the electrical field in your brain. So scientists that tell me, I was doing a radio program 2 weeks ago, and they took callers after we had talked about this. And one of the callers said, Mr. Braden, you should be ashamed of yourself. And I said, tell me more. He said, everyone knows that the brain is designed to do this, but the heart doesn't have a brain, is what he said. The heart cannot do these things. And I said, well, bless his heart. He simply was not aware of the new studies. And I shared this with him. I said, please. I said, I appreciate the intensity of your emotion in the moment. And please go out, look at the website, take a look at the research papers. Can we create change in our world with our brain? Yeah, you can. Remember back in the old days, back in the 60s, we had black and white TVs. I've still got mine, actually, but I'm going to tell you the world looks a lot better sometimes through black and white. But remember when we used to see things like Uri Geller back in the 60s bending spoons, and he'd make it look really hard because the idea was it's got to be hard, remember? So they'd scrunch up Uri or people like that. And he's a good man, and he brought a lot of visibility to the fact that we can change physical reality without touching physical reality. And so I honor him for that. And he made it look difficult. So he'd scrunch up his face, and he'd make it, like I'm going to bend this spoon. And if I had a colored TV, I would see like big veins popping up and his face would get really red. But it's not like that. You can do this with your brain, but look at this. Your brain is relatively weak compared to your heart electrically. Your heart is 100 times stronger electrically than your brain. Look at this. The human heart is about 5,000 times stronger magnetically than the human brain. So if your heart is 5,000 times stronger magnetically, 100 times stronger magnetically, and a change in electrical and magnetic fields changes our world and heals our bodies, doesn't it make sense to use our heart? Makes tremendous sense to me. If you want to feel nurtured in your world, you want to feel loved in your life, you've got to feel as if those things are already present so that they can be mirrored back to you. When you have a feeling in your heart, you're creating the template in the fields that your heart creates so that the physical world can congeal around that field. Does that make sense? You okay with that? How do we do that? Feel as if the outcome already exists. This is precisely what our biblical this is the Gospel of Thomas, the lost Gospel of Thomas right here. The bottom line to the Gospel of Thomas in these particular phrases is feeling as if your prayer is already answered, your body's already healed, your perfect relationship is already here, your abundance is present. As if and give gratitude and appreciation and thanks for the things that are already there. And that is how we bring them into life.